Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video we'll be covering how to create a strength and conditioning mesocycle for a soccer team or individual player. Before creating the mesocycle, we need to establish what qualities are beneficial to train for physical performance in soccer. For this video, we'll exclude goalkeepers since their specific physical qualities required are quite different to the rest of the positions. Every other position on the field involves very similar physical qualities to perform well. The qualities that we can train, which are important for soccer players, are linear speed. This refers to running as fast as possible in a straight line. Change of direction ability. This refers to the ability to rapidly decelerate, then re-accelerate in a different direction. Plyometrics. This refers to the ability to use the stretch shortening cycle during maximum speed running and jumping. Power training. This refers to moving external load in a speed-oriented and ballistic manner. Maximal strength training. This refers to increasing maximal force output. This is beneficial for soccer players for its injury prevention ability and its role in increasing maximum force output for other exercises. And lastly, conditioning or endurance training. This is important for the players to be able to repeat high intensity efforts for the entire 90-minute match. While the majority of these qualities will be trained specifically through strength and conditioning training, change of direction and conditioning training will likely be incorporated into team practice sessions. This is because during soccer practices, hundreds of changes of direction will be performed, and specific conditioning work will also be trained throughout gameplay. So these qualities can be monitored through the team practice sessions rather than being performed separately during strength and conditioning sessions. So for the purpose of this video, we'll only be planning the mesocycle for the qualities of linear speed, plyometrics, power training, and maximal strength. Now that we have established what qualities are to be trained, we can form a basic weekly structure. Step 1 is to determine how many days per week the player or team will be doing strength and conditioning sessions. For the sake of this video, let's say 2 sessions per week will be chosen. Next, we will need to choose what qualities will be trained on what day. Since only 2 sessions are being performed during the week, it is probably best to train each of our selected qualities on both days, but undulate the volume and intensity slightly. So we can see here that each quality is being performed on both days, but the exercises vary slightly in their emphasis. Day 1 will involve maximal velocity linear speed, unilateral plyometrics, lighter loaded power training, and lighter loaded strength training. Whereas Day 2 will involve acceleration focused linear speed training, bilateral plyometrics, heavier loaded power, and heavier strength training. The other structural consideration is how many weeks will the mesocycle be in length. This can be anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks, but for the sake of this video, we will use a 4-week mesocycle structure. The first week will be the easiest week and act as a deload, while the following 3 weeks will provide an overloading stimulus. Before planning the exact details of the mesocycle, we need to determine what time of the year this program will be. Depending on if the athletes are in their off-season, pre-season, or in-season periods, the program may look different. Let's have a look at how the mesocycle may look based on these 3 different times of the year. First, let's look at how an off-season mesocycle may look for a soccer team or athlete. We're going to define the off-season as a period where there is no prescribed training with the soccer club. The exercise selection for the off-season should focus on building baseline capacities to positively enhance performance later in the year. Generally, more force-oriented exercises should be used, rather than highly specific velocity-oriented exercises. For this example, we have chosen the following exercises. For Day 1, we have push-up starts for the linear speed exercise. Since the emphasis will be max velocity running, any unloaded variation of sprints would be an appropriate choice for this program. Push-up starts were selected as it places the athletes in a low starting position, which will slightly emphasize the acceleration portion of the sprint. For a unilateral plyometric exercise, we have chosen bounds. For a power exercise, squat jumps were chosen using a moderate load, and for the strength exercises, we have chosen the trap bar, bench press, stiff leg deadlift, and pull-ups, all with lighter loads and higher repetitions. These exercises were simply chosen to train the full body with different movement patterns. The trap bar is a squat pattern, the bench press is a push pattern, the stiff leg deadlift is a hinge pattern, and the pull-ups are a pulling pattern. For day 2, we have emphasized the acceleration portion of linear speed by using a sled pull. Drop jumps were chosen for a bilateral plyometric exercise. Squat jumps were also chosen for the power exercise, only this time with heavier loads. And the same strength exercises were used for day 2, only this time heavier weights will be used with lower repetition ranges. Now that we have the exercises selected, we need to establish what model of progression will be employed. Since the players are in their off-season, this is a good opportunity to accumulate some workload in order to build work capacity and structural adaptations. So the focus of this mesocycle will be to increase the volume via sets and reps, while keeping intensity the same. Let's now plan the mesocycle in detail. Our linear speed training uses shorter distances of 20 to 25 meters, since the players probably haven't sprinted long distances for several weeks, since they are in their off-season. Also, the players don't need to be at their absolute peak performance at this time of the year. The progression model here is that the number of sets and the distances increase over the mesocycle as a form of increasing volume. So the first week starts with 2 sets of 20 meters, and the last week has 4 sets of 25 meters. The sled pull also uses a heavy load relative to the athlete. This is because the players don't need to be in peak condition, and we can use this as an opportunity to focus more on the force production qualities of sprinting. For the plyometric exercises, a very similar model of progression has been employed. The sets and reps increase slightly over the course of the mesocycle in a similar fashion. The plyometric exercises also use additional load in the form of a weight vest. This will mean slightly slower stretch shortening cycles and slightly greater force production. For the squat jumps, the loads have been undulated on each day. This will mean that faster movement speeds will be seen with the moderate load on day 1, while slower speeds will be seen on day 2 with the heavier load. The loads used here should intentionally be fairly heavy to emphasize the force production qualities rather than the elastic stretch shortening cycle. Both days again follow an accumulation progression where sets and reps are increased over the mesocycle as a method of increasing volume, while the load remains the same. And lastly, the strength exercises are the same on both days, but are undulated once again. So day 1 uses lighter loads with more reps, while day 2 uses heavier loads with lower reps. Once again, we can see that the sets and reps increase over the mesocycle, while the load remains the same. Next, we will create a mesocycle for the pre-season period. This can be defined as a time where team practices are running at a regular schedule, and some irregular practice matches may be planned. So the athletes don't need to be in absolute peak condition yet, although they do need to be performing quite well since the competitive season is upcoming. The exercises chosen for the pre-season are almost identical to the exercise selected in the off-season mesocycle. The only difference here is that the unloaded sprint has a different start position, and the squat jump has been replaced with medicine ball throw. This is because the medicine ball throw will generally involve faster movement velocities than a squat jump. This is likely to have slightly higher transfer to performance. Alternatively, squat jumps could still be used, but with lighter loads. This will essentially achieve the same outcome. The strength exercise could be replaced with different variations if desired, although for the sake of this video, we will keep the exercises the same so that we can clearly see how volume and intensity changes between the different mesocycle examples. What has changed quite significantly is the progression model for the preseason. Since the players are getting close to their season, it is now the time to start getting into good physical condition. So we are going to employ an intensification model of progression for this mesocycle, meaning that the emphasis will be on increasing intensity over the weeks rather than volume. So we can see here that for the linear speed exercises, the distance increases each week, while the number of sets remains the same, except for week 1 because it is the deload week. Since the distance is increasing, the athletes will reach greater top speeds, which acts as a method of increasing intensity. For the sled pull on day 2, the load has also been reduced from heavy load to a moderate load. This will focus slightly more on the speed element and slightly less on the force production element, which should have slightly more transfer to unloaded sprint performance. For the plyometric exercises, we can see here that unlike the off-season, there is no external load used. This will mean faster use of the stretch shortening cycle and higher specificity to unloaded jump and sprint performance. The progression model here is the same as the speed exercises. We have a constant number of sets with an increasing number of reps performed. The medicine ball throw uses a light and moderate load respectively. This will again allow faster movement velocities than heavier loads and therefore have higher transfer to performance. The progression model here uses a constant number of sets with a decreasing number of reps over the mesocycle. This is because the athletes will fatigue very quickly performing these power exercises, so the more reps performed, the lower the average velocity will be. So if we decrease the number of reps performed, the average velocity and power output would be higher. And for the strength exercises, we have a constant number of sets and reps, while the load increases each week. This will increase the max force production of the athletes, while the volume is maintained. And lastly, we will plan a mesocycle for the in-season period. We can define this period as a time when the team is in their formal season and playing regular competitive matches. During this time, the athletes want to be in very good condition to perform well during their games. The in-season period is usually quite lengthy, which means we cannot only follow one progression model for the entire season. So the season should be broken down into mesocycles, and it should be determined when the players need to be in absolute peak condition, for a final or tough opponent for example, and when they may not need to be in the best form, during bye weeks or less competitive opponents. However, for the sake of this video, we will assume that this will be a mesocycle where the players need to be in peak condition for their upcoming schedule. The exercises selected here have changed slightly from the off-season and pre-season. We still have the straight sprint and sled pull for the linear speed category, although the distances and loads will change. For the plyometric exercises, single leg hurdle hops and double leg hurdle jumps have been selected. This is because these exercises will have very high demands on the stretch shortening cycle, and therefore will likely have more transfer to max speed running. Since the athletes are at a time when they need to be in peak condition, we want maximum transfer to performance. For the power exercise, the box jump was chosen. On day 1, this will use no external load, while on day 2, additional external load will be used as a method of undulation. The box jump was selected since it eliminates the eccentric loading from landing. This is a good option for the in-season period since it can minimize the loading on the player's joints, while still getting the power benefits from the explosive concentric output. This way, the players will feel less fatigued and sore on the field, which is what really counts at this time of the year. And once again, the same strength exercises have been maintained for the sake of the video. In reality, these exercises could be changed if the players are plateauing in performance or if more joint-friendly exercises want to be selected. This mesocycle will follow a realization model of progression. This is where volume decreases while intensity simultaneously increases. This will allow maintenance of specific performance while decreasing fatigue. This is best to use when the athletes need to be in absolute peak condition. The realization model shouldn't be used too frequently, as it actually may cause the players to detrain if employed too often. This is because the volume will be low, so the player's baseline work capacity and structural adaptations may diminish. We can see here that the linear speed exercises have a decreasing number of sets each week, with increasing distances of sprints. It can also be seen that the sled pull uses a light load rather than a heavy or moderate load. This is again more specific and will have higher transfer to unloaded sprint performance. The plyometric exercises also decreasing the number of sets performed each week, while the number of reps stays the same. The same progression is seen for the box jumps, however the box jumps undulate between the sessions, with one session using a light external load and the other session being unweighted. And lastly, the strength exercises decreasing the number of sets performed and also decreasing the number of reps performed. This means that the load used will increase quite substantially each week. This will mean that by the end of the mesocycle, the highest forces are being produced, which should have a positive effect on physical performance. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.